video that is the first time detectives learned that there was actually 4 people in that gray Jeep, and that the defendant, Jamel Demons, is in the rear driver's side seat.
Newly released footage is shaking up the entire YNW Melly murder case, threatening to rewrite everything we thought we knew. For the first time, the public is seeing what really went down that night between Melly and Bortlen, and the biggest shock? Someone in their own circle allegedly flipped when they hit a dead end. Here's how it all started. On the night of October 26, 2018, things seemed normal, just another late-night grind at the studio. Young hustlers chasing the dream, trying to make it out of the streets. But by sunrise, 2 close friends were gone, and one of their own would be sitting in jail accused of double murder. This is the real story of how fame, money, and street politics tore apart a brotherhood that had once been unbreakable. The YNW crew had been tight since childhood, growing up together in the tough streets of Gifford, Florida, where making it out alive is rare and loyalty is everything. YNW Melly, born Jamel Demons, was on the verge of superstardom. His breakout hit, Murder on My Mind, had made waves everywhere, but that fame also brought tension. His longtime friends, YNW Sackchaser, Anthony Williams, 21, and YNW Juvie, Christopher Thomas Jr., 19, had been by his side since the beginning. They survived the streets together, but success was starting to drive a wedge between them. The main issue? Money. When Melly signed with 300 Entertainment in July 2018 for somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000, his friends felt left behind. According to text messages, later uncovered by investigators, Sackchaser called Melly out directly. "You blowing up? We still eating crumbs? Pay up or we done?" In Gifford, loyalty isn't just valued, it's a code. Betrayals can turn deadly. 4 years, the YNW crew had been united by shared struggle and dreams of escaping their environment. But as Melly's fame skyrocketed, that unity started to crack. Collaborations with stars like Kanye West put Melly on a whole new level, while his friends were still grinding in the background. The lifestyle that came with his success, luxury cars, big chains, and high-profile features, only made the divide worse. Street politics added even more tension. The YNW crew's ties to their blood-affiliated set in Gifford meant there were expectations about sharing respect and resources. Melly's rise was upsetting the balance of power within their world, leaving old friends feeling overlooked and disrespected. On that fateful night, the group had been at New Era recording studios, working on music as usual. Surveillance footage from the studio shows what looked like just another late-night session. But beneath the surface, resentment and anger were reaching a breaking point, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shake hip-hop to its core.
The vibes look decent, I'm gonna be honest with you. It don't look like nobody kind of beefing, nobody look too excited. You know if somebody kind of got into it, like, niggas might be like, they're not just walking normal. Like, everybody looks kind of chill.
But the real ones in the streets know that still waters run deep. Beneath that calm vibe, something deadly was about to unfold. Around 4:08 a.m., surveillance cameras captured all 4 of them leaving the studio together. The way they loaded into that rented gray Jeep Compass would later reveal everything about who was unknowingly riding to their own death. The footage showed Sackchaser climbing into what the streets grimly call the death seat.
This is Sackchaser. Where does he get in? Good. Remember they said it was a gray vehicle. He gets into... This is Juvie. It's Juvie, I said, right? He gets into the front right side.
Meanwhile, the footage showed Melly slipping into what prosecutors later described as the ideal spot for an ambush, right behind the driver's seat, giving him a clear line on both targets.
Melly comes, and Melly goes to the back passenger. Yeah.
According to the DA's office, that seating arrangement was no accident. As they cruised along the back roads near Miramar Parkway between 4:10 and 4:20 a.m., prosecutors allege Melly opened fire from his spot in the back left seat. It all happened in a flash, so quick his homies didn't even have a chance to process what was going down.
He even shot through the seat multiple times, and there was no defense wounds to be like, stop. You get me? It was that quick. Bang, 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 bang. That quick. When
Sackchaser was hit 8 times. Fatal shots tore through his head, neck, and chest, leaving no chance of survival. Juvie was struck by 4 bullets with equally devastating impact. The autopsy revealed stippling, traces of unburnt gunpowder, around the entry wounds, proving the shots were fired at point-blank range. Neither victim showed any defensive wounds, a chilling sign that they never saw it coming. They likely believed they were just riding with their brother until the very last moment. The medical examiner's report described a level of calculated brutality that stunned even seasoned homicide detectives. Sackchaser's fatal head wound entered through the back of his skull and blasted out the top with such force it shattered the front passenger window. Juvie was shot in the left cheek at close range, the angle showing he was still facing forward when the trigger was pulled. The positioning of the wounds made it clear both victims were completely unaware of the danger lurking behind them. What made the case even more disturbing was the evidence of premeditation. The secluded location, chosen for its lack of witnesses or surveillance, pointed to careful planning. Both victims were hit multiple times, with additional bullets fired through the seats, underscoring that this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst, but a deliberate execution. The absence of any struggle or defensive injuries showed the shooter had the advantage of total surprise. The aftermath revealed just how cold-blooded the act truly was. Forensic analysis later found several bullets had been fired after the victims were already dead, indicating the crime scene was staged. Prosecutors argue this proved the killings were never spontaneous. After allegedly gunning down their own crew, the shooters drove the Jeep to a remote spot, stepped out, and opened fire on it from the outside, using a different gun to make it appear like a random drive-by hit.
To stage the shooting, because they believe people were already dead, they hopped out the car and then they shot up the car afterwards, and they believe those bullet casings they found at that spot was a .40 caliber.
2 words, I did that. According to the DA, those chilling words were nothing short of a confession, an admission that Melly had turned on his own Day One brothers. Prosecutors and the streets agree on the motive, that deadly cocktail of money, jealousy, and gang politics, the same mix that's torn apart more crews than law enforcement ever could. Melly's rapid rise in the game had sparked serious tension over money, shaking up the balance of power within their blood set. All 4 of them were tied to the YNW Bloods, also known as the Ford Slimes, and when cash and loyalty start clashing in the hood, somebody almost always ends up in a box. The most heartbreaking part was how close they once were. Melly had literally tattooed their names on his face while they were still alive, a permanent tribute to the brothers he swore were ride or die. These weren't rivals or ops. These were childhood friends who grew up together in the same struggle, dreamed about making it out through music, and had each other's backs through years of street chaos. Detectives knew something was off the moment they got involved. This didn't look like just another drive-by. The evidence they were about to uncover would reveal a cover-up so elaborate it nearly worked, and showed just how far someone was willing to go to silence the people who knew them best. What began as what looked like another tragic hood shooting turned into one of the state's most complex forensic investigations. The evidence uncovered painted a picture of a carefully planned crime, so meticulously staged it almost fooled the system. When Miramar PD showed up at the hospital, they locked down the Jeep immediately and began questioning Bortlen about what happened. His story was the standard street version. They were driving back from the studio when unknown shooters pulled up and opened fire. But when detectives started digging into his story, what they found didn't line up and raised way more questions than it answered.
And they sit and they walk side by side for an hour, that mile-long stretch, looking for evidence of this drive-by. Because evidence is the remnants a crime leaves behind. And in this case, the lack of evidence is very important.
Detectives shut down the entire stretch of Miramar Parkway from 160th to 172nd Street. For over an hour, they combed that mile-long strip, scanning every inch for any sign of the supposed drive-by. They found nothing. No shell casings, no shattered glass, no bullets, no skid marks, nothing. When they widened the search by another mile, the results were the same. Empty. That was beyond suspicious, considering the Jeep had 16 bullet holes, a blown-out rear window, and 2 shattered side windows. The total lack of evidence on the road didn't just raise eyebrows. It practically made Bortlen's story impossible. Drive-by shootings, especially ones with that much gunfire, always leave behind a trail. Shell casings from the shooter's guns, fragments of broken glass, bullet marks on nearby buildings or other cars, even skid marks from sudden braking or getaways. Yet in this case, there wasn't a single trace. 4 seasoned investigators who had worked countless similar shootings. This was a massive red flag. What made it worse was the damage to the Jeep itself. 16 bullet holes, shattered windows, and bullets that had punched clean through the vehicle should have left physical traces at the scene. Some shots had clearly passed all the way through the Jeep, which meant they should have hit the roadway, a guardrail, or nearby brush. Still, there was nothing. Crime scene techs noticed one more glaring clue: the glass, or rather the lack of it. In a real highway ambush, shattered window glass scatters along the road in a predictable pattern. But here, there were no fragments at all. The clean roadway suggested the Jeep's windows had been shot out somewhere else entirely. The case finally cracked open when detectives decided to retrace the crew's steps. They went back to New Era recording studios, where the crew had been earlier that night, and discovered the whole place was covered by surveillance cameras. What they saw on that footage turned the investigation upside down.
In the video, that is the first time detectives learned that there was actually 4 people in that gray Jeep, and that the defendant, Jamel Demons, is in the rear driver's side seat.
Bortlen conveniently left out one crucial detail. He never said Melly was in the Jeep. That omission changed everything. If Melly had really been in the car during a supposed drive-by, he should have been hit too, unless he wasn't a victim at all. The surveillance footage from the studio exposed even more cracks in Bortlen's story. The timestamp showed the crew leaving at 3:19 a.m., not earlier as he claimed. Even more telling, the footage captured all 4 men walking out calmly. No tension, no rush, no signs of being hunted. They looked like friends wrapping up a regular studio session, not people who thought they were about to be ambushed. Inside the studio, the cameras told the same story. The guys were laughing, making music, and acting like brothers. No arguments. No drama. Nothing that hinted at the kind of conflict that could have escalated into a double murder just minutes later. But the real game changer was Bortlen's silence about Melly's presence in the car. That wasn't some minor oversight. It was a glaring omission that screamed cover-up. Detectives realized that if he was hiding who was in the Jeep, then the rest of his story couldn't be trusted either. That's when investigators shifted into overdrive. They went straight for the digital trail. By pulling cell phone data, locations, timestamps, and messages, they started piecing together a minute-by-minute map of what really went down. Those digital footprints would prove far more damning than any witness on the stand ever could.
Because at that location is where the cell phones of Christopher Thomas, Anthony Williams, and Jamel Demons all line up at 4:02 a.m. At that point, afterwards, Mr. Demons' phone tracks with the 2 victims until about 4:20.
Cell tower data painted a timeline investigators couldn't ignore. All 3 phones, Melly's, Sackchaser's, and Juvie's, pinged at the same remote spot near US 27 and Penrick Road at 4:02 a.m., lining up perfectly with the suspected time of the murders. For the next 18 minutes, until 4:20 a.m., the devices moved together. Then, Melly's phone suddenly broke off while the other 2 continued toward the hospital. The precision of the data let detectives trace the crew's movements minute by minute. It showed the 2 vehicles traveling together across I-595, then splitting at Miramar Parkway and 184th Street. One car turned toward the Sunset Lakes gated community, home to some of their associates, while the other headed north into a more isolated area. One crucial detail sealed the picture. Melly and Sackchaser were using the same make and model of phone on the same service plan. That let investigators track their movements almost in lockstep. Both devices were shown traveling together to the remote site where the murders allegedly happened, staying there during the critical window, then parting ways. Melly's phone heading back toward civilization, while the others went straight to the hospital. But the phones didn't just reveal where they were. They also exposed activity data. Melly's phone logged 70 steps at the studio, another 70 steps at 4:02 a.m., right when the murder supposedly went down, and then a sudden spike of 1,397 steps between 4:42 and 4:53 a.m. That surge of movement lined up with the time he was allegedly trying to get picked up from the scene. The ballistic evidence backed it all up. Investigators recovered spent shell casings inside the Jeep, proving shots were fired from within the vehicle, obliterating the drive-by theory. And when they checked that remote location highlighted by the cell data, they uncovered even more evidence that tied the entire story together.
Why is that important? That shows a gun was fired inside of that car.
At the remote site pinpointed through phone data, investigators uncovered 8 additional shell casings from a .40 caliber firearm. The ballistics analysis revealed 2 distinct shooting phases: the initial gunfire inside the Jeep that killed the victims, and a second round of shots fired outside the vehicle to stage the scene as a fake drive-by. Forensic testing of the shell casings exposed a critical detail. The rounds fired inside the Jeep came from a different caliber weapon than the ones used at the staging site. This pointed to a calculated effort to use multiple firearms to confuse investigators and muddy the ballistic trail. Trajectory analysis of the bullet paths through the Jeep further solidified the case. The fatal shots were traced to the rear left passenger seat, the very spot surveillance footage placed Melly. The bullet angles lined up perfectly with someone firing across the cabin toward both the front passenger seat and the right rear passenger seat. The precision of the shots, coupled with the lack of defensive wounds on the victims, showed the shooter had both element of surprise and point-blank proximity. The staging effort became even clearer under scrutiny. The external shots fired at the remote location were concentrated along the Jeep's passenger side, mimicking the look of a drive-by. But the trajectories and impact patterns didn't align with rounds fired from a moving vehicle. Instead, they indicated gunfire from stationary positions outside the car, further exposing the scene as staged. The medical examiner's report sealed the narrative. The wounds and patterns of damage confirmed this wasn't the result of a chaotic shootout. It was a premeditated, methodical execution, planned and carried out with chilling precision from start to finish.
When the drive-by was staged at 4:02 a.m., the victims were already dead.
The autopsy revealed the most chilling fact of all: the external gunshot wounds were inflicted after death. The staging shots were fired into the victims' lifeless bodies to make it look like they had been caught in a drive-by. This single detail shattered the drive-by narrative and proved that someone deliberately shot up the car after the murders to craft a false crime scene. Investigators also uncovered digital breadcrumbs that exposed the cover-up in real time. Prosecutors say Melly FaceTimed his girlfriend while at the remote staging site, laying the groundwork for his alibi, and even dropped location pins to his people, asking to be picked up from that very spot. But despite this mountain of evidence, the case stumbled when it finally went to trial in 2023. The jury deadlocked. 8 voted guilty, 4 refused to convict. The missing murder weapon, lingering questions about motive, and a few missteps by investigators were enough to create reasonable doubt and block a conviction. 4 years, both Melly and Bortlen stood united, sticking to the story that they were victims of real street violence. But loyalty in the hood has limits, especially when you're staring down multiple life sentences. And what happened next showed just how fragile that loyalty can be under pressure. After 6 years of holding the line, the wall finally cracked. September 9th, 2025, the day loyalty died in the YNW saga. Just hours before his own trial was set to begin, Bortlen made the move that would brand him a rat for life. He cut a plea deal that could send his childhood brother, Melly, straight to death row. For 6 long years, Bortlen had kept it solid, sticking to the drive-by story and never folding. But as jury selection loomed, and the reality of spending the rest of his life behind bars closed in, he had to face the question that breaks even the hardest street soldiers. Is loyalty worth dying in a cage?
YNW Bortlen. He could took the deal. Where did I leave Melly though, brother? Where did I leave YNW Melly in the case?
The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. His defense team was geared up for battle, and the jury pool was already in place. Then, out of nowhere, everything flipped. The charges looming over him painted the picture of a young man cornered by a system built to crush street loyalty.
Counts 1 and 2 is murder in the first degree with a firearm. Those are capital offenses. The maximum and mandatory penalty is life in Florida State Prison. Counts 3 and 4 are accessory after the fact to murder in the first degree. Those are each first degree felonies. The maximum penalty is 30 years in Florida State Prison.
The prosecutors had been playing chess while Bortlen was stuck playing checkers, stacking charges piece by piece until he was staring at 5 potential life sentences, plus an extra 75 years. What started as a relatively survivable case had turned into a legal death trap. At first, Bortlen faced only accessory after the fact charges, basically being accused of helping cover up a crime he didn't commit. That carried time, but it was time he could realistically serve. But as the case dragged on and the state struggled to lock down a conviction against Melly, they shifted tactics. Charge by charge, they cranked up the pressure until Bortlen was crushed under the weight of accusations. The turning point came when prosecutors added 2 counts of first-degree murder. In Florida, that's an automatic life sentence. No plea, no parole, no wiggle room. For a young man who'd already spent years locked up awaiting trial, the thought of never walking out again became the ultimate test of loyalty. Then came witness tampering and gang activity charges, each carrying the potential for more life sentences. These new allegations painted Bortlen as someone who wasn't just covering for a friend but actively obstructing justice as part of an organized criminal enterprise. Every added charge tightened the noose, increasing both his exposure and the state's leverage. The DA's approach was nothing short of strategic warfare. They raised the stakes step by step, transforming Bortlen from a side player facing a couple decades to a man staring down life behind bars. None of it was random. It was a calculated campaign to break his resolve and force the cooperation they'd been after from the start.
Now, I know some of y'all are super thugged out in here. A life sentence, what? But when he was only facing 30 years, he was like, They added the murder charges afterwards to make that nigga know, oh, you think we only want Melly? We'll fry you too. I think that made him think a little bit different.
Under the plea deal, Bortlen completely sidestepped the murder charges. He pled guilty to 2 counts of accessory after the fact to murder, 1 count of witness tampering in a capital case, and 1 count of unlawful use of a communication device. In return, prosecutors agreed to drop the 2 first-degree murder charges that would have all but guaranteed him either a life sentence or a trip to the grave.
In exchange for that, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty on the 2 accessory counts as well as the tampering count. I'm going to sentence you to 10 years in Florida State Prison. That will be followed by 6 years of reporting probation.
But the real cost of the deal wasn't the lighter sentence. It was what Bortlen had to hand over in exchange. The judge made it unmistakably clear that cooperating with the prosecution was part of the bargain.
I guess at some point after the fact, the state wants to take a proffer from you or have a discussion with you, ask you some questions about whatever that may be.
The proffer requirement, a sworn statement forcing Bortlen to reveal everything he knows, is the most dangerous part for Melly. By pleading guilty to accessory after the fact, Bortlen legally admitted that the murders occurred and that he played a role in covering them up.
When pleading to accessory to murder after the fact, you have to acknowledge that the murder happened and you assisted someone or in some way to cover the murder.
Bortlen's admission completely shattered the defense's central claim that the deaths were the result of a real drive-by. That single statement wiped out one of Melly's strongest arguments. His plea also included an acknowledgement that placed his own DNA in the vehicle at the time of the murders, handing prosecutors even more ammunition. The math behind Bortlen's decision reveals the grim calculus defendants face in capital cases. With credit for time already served, potential reductions for good behavior, and the structure of his sentence, he could be eligible for release in as little as 35 years. Compared to the certainty of dying in prison if convicted of first-degree murder, the choice became stark. Decades behind bars versus a guaranteed life sentence with no chance of freedom. But the real blow to Melly's defense came from the proffer requirement. Often referred to as a queen for a day session, it compels the defendant to answer every question truthfully about the events of October 26, 2018. By agreeing to the proffer, Bortlen didn't just cooperate, he dismantled the defense strategy Melly's team had spent 6 years building. Any lie or omission would void the plea deal and bring back the original murder charges, creating a powerful incentive for brutal honesty, no matter how damaging it might be to his former friend. Legally, the structure of the proffer also shields prosecutors from claims of coercion. Because the agreement requires truthfulness and can be revoked if deception is detected, any statements Bortlen provides will carry the full weight of sworn testimony. That gave prosecutors confidence they'd finally secured reliable, legally defensible evidence. After 6 years of standing united, the threat of a life sentence with no parole finally broke the bond between Melly and Bortlen. Street code says you never fold, but when life in a cage is the alternative, even the toughest men start prioritizing survival. For Melly, locked up since February 2019, this betrayal is a devastating blow. His retrial, set for January 2027, will almost certainly feature Bortlen's insider testimony, providing prosecutors with the missing puzzle pieces they've been waiting for. The case underscores a harsh truth: the system knows how to crush street loyalty. While Melly's legal team insists he's being railroaded and that prosecutors are exploiting Bortlen's desperation to secure a conviction at any cost, the former bond between the two men has been permanently destroyed.
Like, y'all know Melly didn't kill his two best friends. Like, come on. Like, we go through this every time with us, culture, being black, artists. Y'all know we targeted.
The math behind Bortlen's predicament painted a grim picture of the choices faced by defendants in capital cases. With years already served and the looming possibility of dying in a prison cell, the calculation became painfully clear: loyalty to a friend or the chance to one day see his family again. The toll of years behind bars has left its mark on both men. When Melly appeared at a bond hearing, the physical and emotional strain of prolonged incarceration was impossible to miss.
Melly looks defeated, man. It's been 7 years, bro. It's been 7 years. He looks defeated, bro. He looks defeated.
The psychological toll of prolonged incarceration in high-security conditions is impossible to ignore. Melly has spent over 6 years behind bars, much of it in solitary confinement or under strict restrictions. The isolation, uncertainty, and constant threat of a possible death sentence have left a clear mark on both his physical appearance and mental well-being. Legal experts point out that such harsh conditions can feel like punishment in themselves, long before a conviction is ever reached. Thanks for watching.